All right. So I want to thank you, of course, for tuning into this Terminator extermination session on those that have the behavioral tactics similar to an unwanted infection that grows from an unattended area and starts developing various different unwanted bacteria that seek to contaminate the things that you consume for nourishment. Okay, the reason why you clean the kitchen is because you have those that you care about and you don't want them to get sick from something that is contaminated. Okay, so we have those that are walking around today, of course, that have arms, leg, arms, head.
We didn't know we were dealing with some savages, some animals who would come back as a beast and destroy us and rape our women and kill our children and suppress and repress our men.
That is exactly that unwanted thing that has developed from something being unattended. So what has been unattended based on my research and is the people. So the people are no longer seeking after things that are in direct opposition of their growth and development towards seeking the higher regions of reality in the sense of connecting themselves up to themselves that might have gotten separated from them because they started seeking after ideas that fall. And that's what happens, of course, is you have to maintain a higher percentage of yourself. And if you start seeking after ideas that fall, you start getting into those types of areas that have a pulling down mechanism way of doing things toward the structure of the family, which some people could call the soul group.
If that part ended up getting distorted also and wasn't strong enough to pull the others back out, it would make more critical mass of reversed mess in the matrix than what the collective had itself, the Ascended Master Collective had itself.
Then that's how you can get, cut off, if that kind of makes sense. And then when you start doing the appropriate things that are necessary to be grafted back in, then that's when now, all eyes on you to see if what you are doing is actually believable or not. If you're actually new to this channel, consider subscribing. What I go over in my content is esoteric and exoteric research in retrospect to how it influences you and how by being on a more pious lifestyle, how that can help you get associated with that which you might have been separated from, okay? So also, if you want to support this level of research, of course, you can support on PayPal. If that's easier for you, you can support on Patreon. If that's easier for you, and I'll leave a couple of examples of ways of getting that done for you, okay? So in this particular video, I wanted to share a few things with you. So what I've noticed is most people are familiar with the Bible, okay? Now, you have to be very careful because there are simulation constraints and parental consciousness constraints where if you're seeking after something and it's an improper knowledge of what you are seeking after, then it seems like there was something that was created in a way in which to keep people from being able to ascend out of a particular grid, possibly set up using phosphine geometries that are associated with lower vibratory fields of existence, okay? What I've seen is, like, for example, in the Book of Truth, it talks about how you had these ones that had an improper knowledge of creation and they wanted to create a side channel and do things that was in direct opposition of the higher ways of doing things, okay? Now, when you precept that to the Sumerian information that's found on the cuneiform tablets, then it kind of says something similar where you have these beings that came from a different location and they came to another location and they created beings from what they found there, of course, to help with some labor and things that they was wanting to get done. Okay, then you also have the so-called Bible that deals with these beings that wanted to create in their image and so forth and so on. So we just have these diluted versions of the same exact thing, possibly happening in different dimensions of existence, because you'll notice in certain teachings how they'll communicate about how like you'll have your fallen versions of something, and then you have the higher versions that end up taking on the same ideas as their falling pieces of themselves. Something very, very interesting. But when you look at this information that's dealing with the Orion, Sirius, or Lyrian information, how you had Tiamat, who was a high-winged dragon queen, and then you had Tiberian, of course, who was a Lyrian, kind of looked like lions or whatever. Then you precept that to the Sphinx, where it looks like there's a woman's head that's raised, and it looks like there's a lion-style bearish type body that's laid down, where it shows that it's a unification of these two houses, which is the same thing that's spoken about in the Orion Lyrian information, how it says that Tiamat and Tiberian joined together, and those two houses was able to come together and stop a few things, and then was able to create like this master race. And then you have the same thing that took place with so-called Anu and Antu coming together and preventing those wars that was taking place for a very long time, where you had the woman from the south and then the male from the north that unified their houses, and then it brought peace where they weren't dealing with the struggles that they was dealing with anymore. So then when you do a little bit more research and you start looking into the information about the so-called Americas, and you're like, wait a minute, there's a group over here, and then there's some stuff that talks about these Nagas, and these Nagas being these reptilian or serpent beings, right? And don't forget that in the book that everybody's familiar with that's called the Bible, there's something in there that says, look, I will raise someone up from Jesse, from the root of Jesse, which is the base of the spine. You can look at that as being the root. And then that gets raised up will be a what? Fiery flying serpent. You get what I'm saying? And then it mentions something about a cockatrice there. So, and then you have it also talking about how the scepter would not depart from Judah. So then you also have something talking about two sticks being one stick in my hand. So it's dealing with a marriage or a wedding chamber where you have two houses that are possibly being joined together, if that makes sense. And then you have the gospel according to Thomas that says, look, blessed is the man who consumes the lion and the lion becomes a man, but cursed is the man who gets consumed by the lion and then the lion becomes a man. So then I'm looking at this information and I'm like, okay, precepting that with the countertop in the kitchen being unattended and having unwanted populations being developed from it that causes people to get sick, we actually have those who are perpetrating being a people that are actually providing that sickness to everyone. And they are literally having meetings where they actually talk about doing that and how to maintain it, right? So I shared something that talked about a virus particle, how it has these protein keys that tries to attach itself to the receptors, and it tries to deceive the cell to where the cell allows it in, and then that virus particle tries to start commanding more virus particles. I was literally listening to one of these guys' videos, and what they were actually talking about was these various different echo worlds, these God worlds, and how you have 7 lower heavens, 7 higher heavens that is connected by an echo core, and talking about keys and locks and so forth. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Illustrate that a little bit more clearly. So we have the 4 Katara grids that form our local universe. And they represent quadrants. They're referred to as quadrants within our universe. Now, at this level, we have an additional structure within our Katara grid. We have what are referred to as locks. Now, what are locks? Locks effectively arise between dimensional levels and between density levels, and they effectively hold the structure of creation in place.
These guys are actually talking about being a virus particle and how to actually get in to various different places that they weren't actually supposed to be getting into in the first place. And they also speak about trying to trace their lineage to a specific tree.
Given. But the name for the God seed that the human line is based on, that we originally came out of, is the Melchizedek God seed. The FR level for human lineage is called the Ra Confederacy. The Riche is the Emerald Order. So everybody's going to be really familiar with these different names. Geomantic entity level that creates the time matrices is the Azurite Council. The Rishi level is the Elohai. Our avatar level are the Anahazi. Our oversoul level is the Oraphim. Our soul level is the Turanusium, and the incarnate is the Turanusium too. So that is the pattern that we need to follow as humans in terms of our pathway of ascension out of the time matrix into the monadic and into the God seed levels. We have to retrace that exact lineage.
Like, here's an example. So that you have those ones that are in that land that's calling themselves Judah. Come on, guys, you know. So what they're actually identifying with is 0.000000001% of something, and they trace their information to the woman because it is known that the woman carries the gene stronger, right? So that's why they identify with the woman, even though in the scripts it talks about whoever your father is, that's who you are. But the reason why they're attaching to the woman for their lineage of who they are is because of the strongness of the gene, right? And we already know the reason why they do that, because what was happening with the women and those virus particles in terms of how they were, you know, basically raping the women and so forth, and taking their, trying to take on their codes and so forth.
Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out.
So what I'm basically saying is that we've had flesh that has been unattended, and it has developed stuff from being unattended, and now that stuff that got developed is now trying to take on the identity of the flesh, saying, hey, I am this same exact thing, after confusing the flesh and have the flesh calling itself something else like black. You know, so then they're able to associate with these terms like Orion or Judah or whatever, these terms, and try to take on the benefits that was actually associated with somebody else. An example of this is in the Noah Webster's dictionary. When you in one of the older versions, it says, look, the word American was originally applied to the copper-colored people that was found here. Now it's applied to the Europeans. Do you get what I'm trying to explain? So then now these guys are calling themselves black. I wonder how. And then you have these ones that are now trying to take on the benefits of something that was actually supposedly belonging to someone else. So we have to kind of look at this stuff today and say, once we bring it to the simplest level of the cell, then we can understand and see that we actually have unwanted populations in the form of infections and viruses and germs, unwanted germs that cause sickness. And when you look at your life support system, which is like a molecule, a planet, because it operates similar to how we function. So then we have to say, okay, is it well or is it sick? You get what I'm trying to explain? Because these unwanted populations are at war with everything. I mean, they're at war with the air that even they have to breathe. And then you start doing the research on it, like, man, that might have something to do with this oxygen levels. Do you get what I'm saying? So then they're at war with all the animals that they hold fast to so much. And literally everything in your life support system. I mean, they're at war with the food, you know, in terms of how much they're trying to sustain their existence, but then they're also even contaminating themselves in the process. So it's like everything that the germ or the unwanted populations or the infections are doing, it's just damaging. Do you get what I'm saying? Because it's not their environment. So when you look at the maggot that gets formed from the larva, from the fly that lands on something, because that's what the fly releases in order for it to turn something into a liquid so it can eat. But then maggots start forming from that if something starts decaying. So then that maggot starts trying to take on the identity of what it was grown from and at the same time it needs it as a feeding source. You get what I'm saying? Because it has to survive from its source, but then it's only so far that maggot can go in the path of evolution or whatever you want to call it. So that's the reason why you see these workshops. I don't know if you're familiar with seeing these workshops where it looks like something is on a marketplace where people are selling things. They don't actually know what they're actually really doing, but you know, they're trying to sustain themselves, you know, and at the same time they're trying to create vehicles for themselves that might be able to sustain things that they can't sustain, if that kind of makes sense.
What if you found out that your only destiny was implosion unless you tapped into other systems? What if you knew that ascension was no longer even a possibility for you? That the only way you could go home and be healed to go back to where you came from was to do it in total innocence like a child with no knowing whatsoever, because you'd go back in pieces. There's a terror in that feeling, the terror of annihilation. That great, my parts might go back, but I'm not going to know it. You know? There's a feeling of being finite. And if you look around at the world we're in today, you can see the huge effect that these races have had once they begin to blend with the races here. Because most of our dogmas that we talked about earlier, the religious dogmas, even the science dogmas, are all coming from that place. They're all coming from a place where ascension really isn't an option. Survival of the fittest is one of the things that happens when a race realizes it's finite. And the only way it can sustain and not implode and not be blown back to space dust is to take energy from something else.
So what I wanted to share with you, of course, is how we need to really be looking at this information. So as someone who is of a high house, then whatever you're saying possibly is very powerful. So we want to change the way that we are sharing our information. When you're coming from the programming of slave ships, then it's easy to want to say they did it, this is what they're doing, because you have this idea of wanting to help your people. But then I said, man, we got to do the research on this, because we keep talking about what they're doing, but then they're possibly sitting around happy thinking that now you're giving them the ability to actually do something. So we have to approach this information from a terminating perspective. We'll say, look, you know, guard your gates. You know, there's 10 entry points to your body. You have your eyes, you have your ears, you have your nose, your mouth, your pores on your skin, your front private and your back private. Set up guards at those gates. Don't allow just anything in. And we had ways of dealing with situations where we wasn't just entering into anything. We weren't taking their daughters to our sons or their sons to our daughters, because we knew that they would lead our hearts away from our soul group. You get what I'm saying? We weren't thinking gods and things like that. We just knew that we had an elder who was the highest of our lineage, and then obviously there were things that was being done to just protect the soul group or the family. if you get what I'm trying to explain, which later got interpreted as gods when somebody is like reading certain information. They're like, oh, okay, well, they were worshiping this, they were worshiping that. No, we just had a high way of development and growth in the sense of, being raised from the dead, the coming forth by day. Or the Book of the Dead is really just talking about how you can have a higher being, and then they can have dead cells, and then those dead cells are now able to do what is necessary to become a living cell, and then you can actually be a co-participant in the bodies of the immortals or something along those lines, right? So it was just like a high way of thinking about something, because what is death to someone is not the same death as to someone else. So someone could be literally living dead, if you get what I'm trying to explain. But because of their projected reality, they think that they're alive. So what I wanted to introduce is some topics, like how you have, you might want to do some research on this Tiamat Tiberian thing and how it correlates with the Sphinx, and how we've had the infections who have been literally teaching the information, but they've been kind of teaching it from the perspective of the infection, to where they've taken out information that could speak to your cells, and it's kind of has a reverse mechanism in terms of what it's doing. It's similar to eating a fruit that doesn't have a seed within it to reproduce itself.
And for the first time, with the risen Christ mysteries of the 20th century, along with that came public access to the Tree of Life, and we could rush in to the more or less abandoned temple. And most people decided to have a beer party in the empty temple. You know, the folks are gone, I've got a good idea. This is a great space, we've never been allowed in here. So the social sciences started in the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, sociology, psychiatry, psychology, and their objective was to see what was under the hood.
It's similar to that. So we want to look at this information because it looks like they are literally talking about ways of attaching themselves to an ancestral virus. And when we think about that, we're really just talking about those that have done the things that they've done to stop previous people from doing the things that they were trying to do. So they're just basically trying to continue their existence by attaching themselves to something that aligns with their way of doing stuff. So if the maggot was able to talk and get on stage, what would it say? What would it change? What pictures would it change? What way would it try to make you think that you are nothing and make you think that they are everything, even though behind closed doors they're literally needing to feed off of you, if you get what I'm saying, in order to sustain their existence. But on the main stage, they're trying to promulgate that they're everything and that you're nothing. So a lot of this information, guys, has been taught from the perspective of the unwanted populations. Do you get what I'm saying? By the fruit you should know the tree. So then for those who's supposed to be leading, we have to look at how you're being looked at on the main stage and then do the necessary things to fix that, if you get what I'm saying, because they are not in a position to be heard. So they're like stepped down versions of the real thing. So they're like way stepped down in terms of who they are. So it's not necessarily saying anything bad about anyone. It's just putting things in the right order, because under that system, it's upside down, if you get what I'm trying to explain. So in this particular Terminator Exterminator session, what I mainly wanted to communicate with you on is how we need to revisit this information that we've been looking at, and not just finding a new outfit, changing the names, but keeping the same models. This stuff is not working, guys. Instead of just looking for members and things like that, we actually need to run a self-assessment and say, okay, how long have we been participating in this? How are we doing? And what is the direct correlation to that? We're not interested in just taking a few people out of this position and then replacing them with a few other people. We're just changing the people who are the capitalists, if you get what I'm trying to explain. And that's what I see in a lot of these groups, is they're taking the same models, the same Judeo-Christian models, and just changing the names, changing the outfits, but keeping the same structure. So we need to run the self-assessment and see if we're actually growing. So then we have to revisit all of this information again. We have to look at the Bible in a completely different way and say, okay, what we're really dealing with is a family. And then what we have to say is, are we being connected to that family? Are we becoming a nation from ourselves? Are we purging out the things that we've developed and formed ties to that is allowing for this other stuff to try to feed on? Are we transcending the parental consciousness and these simulation constraints? Because it looks like something has been created. Like, for example, I could look out the window, just thinking, and if there's a girl that walks by, literally I'm feeling something happening as if I'm thinking the wrong way, but I notice that there's something that's designed that's literally trying to force behavior. So now I was like, I got to do the research on this. So it looks like there's simulation constraints that's trying to cause people to be, if you're out of these areas, then it's trying to get you back in there. So I'll put something on the screen that shows how you have the cellular hard drive memories that's all the way down there at the bottom, and then desires and things like that. But it looks like there's some design that's trying to keep people confined to lower ways of doing things, if you get what I'm trying to explain. Even when you transcend out of it, it's trying to get you back in there. So it just seems like a lot of this stuff is like a lie, like this Gnostic text, how it talks about how, don't go back to creation. You know what I'm saying? A lot of stuff is starting to make sense. So, but that's what I wanted to explain. If you want to support this research, like I said, we got the PayPal for you. We got the Patreon, where I kind of upload a little bit more advanced information. But we want to get away from the race card, because that allows for contaminating associations to exist and have a reason to say something. So we just need to start looking at this from the simplest level of the cell. Do you get what I'm saying? And deal with it from those perspectives. And it's very difficult to complain, if you get what I'm trying to explain. And it's just straight. It's a narrow path when you deal with it from those perspectives. Okay, so you have these higher regions of things, and then you have step down versions. So you have those who are high that wanted to create, and then things get grosser and grosser and grosser and grosser. You know what I'm saying? So on your path of getting, then you're just purging out the grossness, and you're disassociating with things that have a way about it that seems like it wants to connect up to lower vibratory fields. So that's really what you're transcending out of. So don't return to the creation aspect of it until you create the environment that you desire. So sometimes you have to just stop participating in stuff until you start seeing the changes that are necessary. Okay. All right. So if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them underneath the like button, and then I'll see you in the next one.